In today's episode, we're talking all about New Jersey's online gambling industry, including sports betting and online casino gaming. To assess the state of the market, talk through some of the latest trends, and provide an industry perspective on the proposed internet gaming tax increase in the state budget, we're joined by Jane Buchanevich from the Levinson Institute for Gaming, Hospitality, and Tourism here at Stockton University. And stay tuned until the end of the episode for more discussion about some of the larger conversations around the online gambling industry and our latest Stockton poll results, which shed some light on where the public stands on the potential internet gaming tax hike. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome. My name is Alyssa Maurice, and this is Hughes Center Conversations, where we bring in experts to talk about the issues that New Jerseyans care about. I'm joined for today's episode by Jane Buchanevich from the Levinson Institute for Gaming, Hospitality, and Tourism, which is known as LIGHT here at Stockton University. So that's what I'll be calling it from now on. Jane, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So before we dive into it, can you start us off by introducing yourself and talking a bit about your work at LIGHT?
Okay, well, I did have a 22-year career in the casino gaming industry before I started teaching. Now, I've been at Stockton since 2012, and I've been with LIGHT since 2020. And the work that we do is really research and analysis for the gaming, hospitality, and tourism industry. We have a really strong advisory board of key industry leaders and also just public leaders in the Atlantic City area. And they advise us on what needs to be researched, and then we use the university's resources to do the research that benefits the industry.
That's great, yeah. And given that we are an anchor institution, Stockton is very integral to the region. It's definitely an asset to have a center like that on campus that's researching, the dominant industry of the area. So thank you for that work. Can you start us off by giving a rundown of the gaming industry in New Jersey? And we can maybe start with the state overall and then talk about Atlantic City in particular. But how is the market doing? What are some recent trends that you can share?
Well, the market, I could go through a little history of the market because it has had many ups and downs over the years. 2006 was the first peak of the industry, and that was right before Pennsylvania casinos opened. Then after Pennsylvania opened, there was a downturn, and many casinos closed during that period. Then there was a resurgence again when Hard Rock and Ocean opened, and everything was on the increase again until COVID hit. Since COVID, the industry has recovered on an overall basis. Some casinos are doing better than others, but overall it has recovered since COVID. But the trends have been that the biggest growth segments are internet gaming and online sports betting.
Well, it's good to hear there has been a recovery post-COVID. Of course, all businesses suffered in some way during COVID, but our region and Atlantic City in particular, which is so reliant on the service and entertainment industries, was really hit hard. As you said, internet gambling and online sports betting are the big drivers of this recovery. I imagine people got used to gambling online during that 3-month period during COVID when casinos were closed, and they continue to do so now in the years after. So where does internet gaming stand compared to the other sources of revenue for the industry? And do casinos have to share that revenue with these tech platforms like FanDuel or DraftKings? How does that work?
Yeah, each casino negotiates their own contracts, and that is not public information, but they definitely share with these tech providers like FanDuel and DraftKings. And each casino, like I said, has their own negotiated contracts, so it's hard to tell exactly what percent they get. But I do know that the internet gaming provides 40%, roughly 40%, maybe 42 to 45 of the overall gross gaming revenue. However, it doesn't really contribute that much to the bottom line. Because recently, even though the total gross gaming revenue has grown significantly because of internet gaming, profits in the casinos, gross operating profit has been down about 9% in 2024. So, unfortunately, they're not taking as much of that as they need to offset losses in other areas.
So despite the successes of internet gaming, it sounds like the casinos are still pretty reliant on in-person gaming.
Yeah, in-person gaming brings a lot of other revenue with the hotel revenue, food and beverage, entertainment. So that really is what casinos strive to increase every year.
Can you talk a bit about Atlantic City's market in particular? Any trends that are specific to our region?
Well, one trend, this is kind of a future trend, I guess you would say. Everyone's concerned about the impact of New York opening casinos downstate. They have some casinos now, but they're going to be opening them right in the New York City area. So everyone's concerned about that for the future. So what I think the casinos are doing now is trying to prepare for that. So they're trying to invest in their properties, have new attractions to bring people to Atlantic City specifically. So I would say that's the big trend. Like I said, internet gaming and sports betting have been growing, but the brick and mortar gaming has leveled off somewhat.
Well, I guess we'll switch gears now to talk about another change the industry may be grappling with soon. Governor Murphy's 2026 fiscal year budget includes a proposal to raise the tax rate on New Jersey sports betting and online casinos from 13% and 15%, respectively, to 25% for each of those types of gambling. And I'll add that this is part of a larger plan for $1 billion worth of tax increases across various industries in order to increase revenue and address the state's structural budget deficit. So, cigarettes, alcohol, recreational services, and activities like laser tag, bowling, or interior design are all subject to potential tax hikes. So, sports betting and online gambling are not the only targets here, but of course, that's the tax increase we're going to focus on. The online gambling tax is projected to bring in a $402.4 million increase in revenue annually. So that's the perspective of the administration, right? It's going to help raise revenue to address the state's budget shortfall, which budget analysts have warned is going to be pretty dire when the state depletes its surplus account, likely in the next couple of years if spending stays roughly the same. But from an industry perspective, if the increase goes into effect, what is the impact on the gaming industry?
Well, because of the fact that internet gaming is not bringing a lot of money to the bottom line, this will just further erode profit margins. So I'm sure the industry is concerned about that. Atlantic City is different than other states like Pennsylvania, for example, which has a higher tax on internet gaming revenue. Their casinos are more spread out, so they don't have to compete as much as Atlantic City casinos, which are 9 properties within a very small geographic area. So Atlantic City casinos have higher promotional expenses. So that affects their bottom line. So that's one reason why I think operators are concerned. Even though Atlantic City enjoys a lower tax rate than some other states, they're on par with West Virginia with a 15% tax rate. And Nevada does not have internet gaming, but they have online sports betting, and that it's taxed at like 6.7%. So right now, Atlantic City and New Jersey rather, is in a good position compared to other states, which is why I'm sure they're looking at we could raise the tax rate because other states have done it. But the unique part about Atlantic City is the 9 casinos in one geographic area.
I appreciate you raising that distinction between New Jersey's casino industry and some other states. That's an interesting point to consider through this whole conversation that Atlantic City is unique in that it's a resort town. We're not talking about standalone casinos. And like you said, when you pointed out the importance of in-person revenue, there's a whole ecosystem of restaurants and theaters and other attractions that rely on gaming tourism. So it's certainly important to acknowledge that. And all of that, I'm sure, plays into some stakeholders' thinking around the proposed tax increase. We've heard some pushback on the online gambling tax from local legislators and casino executives. I saw recent comments from Senator Vince Palestina, who represents Atlantic County, saying that the proposal wouldn't just hurt the industry, but Atlantic City specifically, and would lead to, quote, a loss of jobs, revenue, and potentially casinos closing. As someone who is plugged into the industry, what has the reaction been from local stakeholders, and how do you think they'll adjust if this goes into effect?
Well, I think that they are very concerned, as I said, about their reduced profits this year, 2024. But I think they would have to, because the growth in brick and mortar gaming has slowed a little bit, they're going to have to cut expenses to combat the increase in taxes. So I'm sure that's a concern for workers who could reduced hours or maybe layoffs or something like that. So I'm sure that's what the industry is concerned about.
And I'm sure the timing doesn't help, right?
Yes, everybody's worried about New York, so they are concerned about any change on the
Yeah.
horizon.
Right. And even just in general, there's a lot of economic uncertainty right now across the globe.
Yes, in general.
At the time of this recording, the Trump administration has recently announced a 90-day pause on the universal tariffs that were imposed, but there is still a 145% tariff on all goods from China. So markets are down as a response. Things are changing quite frequently. Economic policy has been unpredictable, and there have been a lot of big changes at the federal level. So I'm sure all industries are facing some uncertainty right now. Now, can you speak to how bettors or customers may be affected by the tax?
Well, from what I've read, the internet gaming operators like FanDuel and DraftKings, the sports betting, online sports betting, their position is that it could affect the amount of promotional giveaways they give to the players. So in the long run, it could affect the players.
For this last question, I know you already touched on this a bit earlier, but how does New Jersey compare to other markets, like nearby New York, which does impose a higher tax on online sports betting? Sports betting is taxed at 51% in New York, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. Is there a model elsewhere in the US that you think New Jersey should be looking to? Any lessons we can learn?
Well, I think New Jersey and Las Vegas are the two big destination markets. And of course, New Jersey's not as big as Las Vegas, but it's a similar model with a lot of entertainment, food and beverage, hotels, all in one area. We have the beach and boardwalk. So it's a resort area like Las Vegas. And one of the reasons the casinos were happy about the lower tax rate in New Jersey in general when they first legalized gaming is they could reinvest more in their properties. When you're taxed at 50+%, it's harder to invest. So, there's pluses and minuses to the lower tax rate. Like I know from the state's perspective, they need the money. It's important to increase the taxes to be on line with other states. But from the industry's perspective, I think they are concerned about their ability to reinvest, to compete with New York, which is on the horizon.
Yeah, to put it in perspective, according to the Tax Policy Center, Nevada accounts for more than half of commercial casinos in this country, and yet it collects less tax revenue from casino gambling than states like Pennsylvania. Their revenue is about on par with Maryland. So, New Jersey and Nevada, as the early adopters of commercial casinos, have lower tax rates than these other states. But to your point, they are fundamentally different. So that's something to consider. Is there anything else we should touch on? Anything we missed or any other points you'd like to make?
Well, because of the higher tax rate on internet gaming compared to slots and tables, and the growth in internet gaming and sports betting in the last couple of years, New Jersey has seen a big increase in the amount of tax they collect. So in 2012, before internet gaming, New Jersey collected about 200 million in taxes. But since then, in 2024, they collected 680 million. So it really has increased over the years, even without a tax increase.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's important context to have.
But that does still represent a very small percent of the state's overall budget. But it was a big increase.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
The industry perspective is important, particularly for us here in Atlantic County, where it is a big part of our economy. But before we wrap up, there are a couple other angles or perspectives on this topic I do want to address. The first is gambling addiction. We already talked about the perspective of people who may see this tax increase as a good source of revenue for the state amid our budget concerns. But there may also be people who are concerned about the rise in gambling addiction in the state, especially among young men, who, at the very least, are not too worried about the tax's impact on an industry that they may feel is harmful to consumers. And they may even see this tax hike as a way to potentially disincentivize online gambling if fewer promotions and enticements are available to players, maybe even helping to mitigate some of the behavioral trends that we're seeing. So I do want to acknowledge that perspective and talk a little bit more about that. There's a June 2024 study by Wayne Taylor, Daniel McCarthy, and Kenneth Wilbur called Online Gambling Policy Effects on Tax Revenue and Irresponsible Gambling. And just as the title implies, they estimated the causal effects of state policy changes on tax revenue and on gambling behaviors. Their findings indicate that policies that legalize online casino gaming increase tax revenue for the state and also increase irresponsible gambling and gambling helpline calls significantly more than policies that do not legalize it. I'll link the study in the episode notes for those who may want to read more of the details, but their conclusion is essentially that there are pros and cons to online gaming that states need to weigh, which is true of virtually any policy. The state legislature did hold a hearing in the fall to discuss the impacts of online sports betting in the state. On one hand, there were people testifying to the economic benefits, the jobs that exist in the industry, the money it brings in. In the first 9 months of 2024, online sports betting brought in $835 million in revenue for casinos, horse tracks, and their online partners. And of course, as Jane pointed out, every dollar counts when it's a big portion of overall revenue, costs are going up, and other sources of revenue, like brick and mortar gaming, are lagging. But there was also testimony from people like Felicia Grandin, the executive director of the Council on Compulsive Gambling in New Jersey, who talked about problem gambling. She pointed out that nationwide, 1 to 3% of adults are problem gamblers, whereas in New Jersey, 6% of adults are. Since 2018, calls to the 800 Gambler helpline in New Jersey have increased by 277%. And lastly on this, I'll say that Lori Kalani, Chief Responsible Gaming Officer for DraftKings, was also in attendance at this hearing to talk about their policies in place to identify and help problem gamblers. Now, the other perspective to consider is public opinion. What do New Jerseyans think of this potential tax increase? Well, the Stockton Polling Institute here at the Hughes Center recently conducted a statewide poll of New Jersey voters, and we asked about the state budget. Given the budget deficit the state is facing, we asked voters what proposals they would support to raise revenue and what proposals they would support to cut spending in the state. Of the various proposals to raise revenue that we asked about, and they were all presented in random order for each respondent, raising taxes on online gambling and sports betting did get the highest rate of support at 58%. So that was the most popular approach to raising revenue, followed by raising taxes on wealthy individuals at 55%. Those were the only two proposals that gained majority support. We did also have a question to measure the rates of online gambling in the state, and 7% of voters gambled online often or sometimes in the past year, 8% rarely did, and 85% did not at all. And consistent with other data out there, it was more prevalent among men than women. So, given the rates of online gambling among voters at large, you can see why a majority would be fine with that tax hike. And I will link these poll results in the episode notes as well, so I encourage everyone to take a look at those. So that is where we are. Those are the different sides of this conversation. As far as the tax increase, it is not official yet. The 2026 budget still needs to be voted on by the legislature and finalized in June, so we will know more in the coming months. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Hughes Center Conversations is presented by the Hughes Center for Public Policy at Stockton University. The Hughes Center aims to encourage broader civic engagement through research, events, and student programming. Learn more about our work at stockton.edu/Hughes Center. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Stockton University. The university does not endorse any specific content or opinions discussed in this podcast and is not responsible for any offensive language, statements, or inaccuracies that may arise.